In Stephen King's novel The Dead Zone, there's an infamous scene in which a lightning rod salesman goes to a bar and tries to sell lightning rods to the proprietor. The proprietor turns him down despite the warnings by the salesman that his bar could be at risk. This section is sometimes seen as evidence of King's overwriting. Not only does this scene not seem to be directly important to the rest of the plot, and the character of the salesman never shows up again, but this is actually the second traveling salesman scene in the novel, after one involving a very significant character in the novel, Greg Stillson, as a Bible salesman who kicks a dog. But it tends to be justified in two ways. The first is that it's an homage to Ray Bradbury's lightning rod salesman scene in Something Wicked This Way Comes. The second way it's justified is that it foreshadows a turning point in the main character, John Smith. He learns of the consequences of doing nothing when he has early knowledge of a disaster affecting this bar, which will be hit by lightning and will burn down, killing many people. The bar the salesman warned could have been hit is hit by lightning, and Smith learns through his actions that he can change the future, and things that he predicts will happen can be changed and altered. And this, of course, leads him to the final act in the novel, which is the attempted assassination of the politician Greg Stillson, who he believes will rise to become president and begin a nuclear war. King's novel, The Dead Zone, is a novel about precognition. Our main character in the novel, John Smith, is a psychic whose powers were unlocked and enhanced after a car accident. He proceeds to use this ability in several ways. He solves a serial murder case in Castle Rock. He protects that boy he's tutoring from the fire at the bar. And eventually he ends his career as a psychic by trying to assassinate a politician who he knows will start a nuclear war. But I think there might be a third reason for the lightning rod salesman scene. And I'm reminded at this moment of one of the best X-Files episodes, which involves a man who can see the future. And he only can see how people will die. That's his only ability. But he takes a job selling life insurance. This scene is not or this episode of the X-Files is not that far from the scene described in this novel. Who better to sell lightning rods than someone who knows which buildings will be hit and can therefore sell the necessity of buying a lightning rod? In fact, in this scene, King even writes, maybe someday he'll be sorry, as part of the inner monologue of the short-lived character. In other words, John Smith is not the only psychic in this novel. The lightning rod salesman is one too. King populates his works with psychic abilities, and we know the shine, or whatever we want to call it, is distributed across the novels. We have Carrie White, we have Charlie McGee, Danny Torrance, Dinky Ershaw, just to name a few that exhibit these abilities. Of course, and all the breakers in the Dark Tower. And these powers vary. Of course, they range from telekinesis to precognition to other abilities that some of them are sort of unique to King's fiction, such as Dinky Ershaw. That's something I don't know if has ever appeared later on in other forms in fiction, but he can make people kill themselves by writing them letters. Now, I have no direct evidence of this, that the salesman is a psychic with precognitive abilities, except that the salesman seems to be very confident that this bar is in danger. Of course, we can say this is just because all salesmen are going to try to make the best case they can, but I think it's simply more interesting to imagine the lightning rod salesman as, in fact, a psychic, one of many breakers who appear in King's fiction. But King not only likes to use people with psychic abilities, he also likes paired couples. We have, of course, Walter Paddock and Roland. We have Mother Abigail and Randall Flagg. We have Peter and Thomas in The Eye of the Dragon. We have It and Maturin. We have Charlie McGee and Rainbird, and on and on and on. I mean, we could go novel by novel and make these couples. So here's my question. Is Greg Stillson also a psychic? The evidence for this is probably not that strong, but it's simply something I'm going to throw out there for people to take or leave. So what is our evidence that Greg Stillson could be a psychic or have some ability to see the future, some kind of precognition? Well, when we first meet him, he is a Bible salesman, and this is this classic scene where he beats up this dog for snipping at him and it's a very violent act. And this shows him as a very odious character right from the beginning. This is something King does a lot, especially in his early works. He really was good at creating these pure evil characters that the reader instantly has a distaste for, and there'll usually be some action. It might be beating a woman, or in this case, it's beating a dog that does it. So this is a common kind of King trope, but this scene is rather bizarre. The first thing we learn about Greg Stillson is that he has gone through a lot of jobs already, that he's not good at keeping a job. So his erratic behavior has been there throughout his entire life. He started erratically, and his political career is erratic. His whole profession has been erratic. He's not the kind of person who would sell Bibles if not for some other reason. And maybe he has a kind of attention deficit disorder, or maybe he's doing things because he senses that in the aggregate they will lead him to where he needs to go. He also seems to have an interest in predicting the future, just in the things he sells and in the pamphlets and things he distributes, because he sells the Bible, which of course has revelation and predictions of the future galore in it, but he also has right-wing propaganda in there, predictions of how the Rothschilds are going to take over the world, or the Roosevelts or others are taking over the American economy, some anti-Semitic literature as well. So all of this is kind of mixed up with kind of predictive behavior. Now, after he beats up the dog for snipping at him, the dog actually snips at him and bites his pants. But after he nearly kills the dog and leaves the dog for dead, he says, "Shouldn't have bit me. You hear him? You hear me? You shouldn't have bit me, you dipshit dog. No one gets in my way. You hear? No one." The problem is the dog didn't bite him. The dog bit his clothes. Now, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but perhaps Greg Stillson had a premonition that, or a knowledge that this dog would bite him, and therefore was able to avoid the bite and then proceeded to punish him for a pre-crime. Another thing we learn is that Greg Stillson has headaches, which is, of course, something John Smith also has throughout the novel, and they get progressively worse as he starts to realize he's dying. So headaches is, in this novel, a key identifier of the psychic behavior. And then there's a line he says at the end of the scene, quote, this is actually Stillson's internal monologue, quote, "His greatness was on the way. It might still be years ahead. He was young, sure. Nothing wrong with being young, as long as you understood how you couldn't have everything all at once, as long as you believed it would come eventually. He did believe that." End quote. So he seems to already know that his future will be great. It's not, I hope. It's not, he's going to work hard at it. There's no ambiguity in that statement. So this scene, and I think his whole career, is best explained by understanding Greg Stillson as someone with similar abilities to those of John Smith. But I think more strongly is just the whole career of Greg Stillson, as described in this novel, is very, very strange and very weird. It's not in any way a regular political career that you would expect. It's very erratic. He takes jobs seemingly randomly. He's a Bible salesman. He's a real estate guy, and then he gets into politics at the local level, and then he starts to move up. And his behavior as a politician is very erratic as well. During his campaign rallies, he has these really preposterous speeches and physical movements, and there's even a scene where John Smith and his employer are watching this rally with him and are just laughing at it, laughing at how ridiculous he looks. And this is actually confirmed, this ridiculousness of his career and the way he does things is confirmed by several characters. Sonny, who is one of Greg Stillson's people he encounters early in his political career anyways, he's crazy. He's got 2 public service awards on his wall and pictures of him talking to the Rotarians and the Lions, and he's vice president of this dipshit town JC's, and next year he'll be president, and he's just as crazy as a fucking bedbug. And that's not the only example we have of other characters seeing Greg Stillson and just seeing him as a nut job. We actually have another example in literature of someone using precognition to advance themselves politically, despite a humble background and a very erratic political behavior. This novel that I'm thinking about is Philip K. Dick's The World Jones Made. In this novel, a man named Jones has the ability to see exactly 1 year into the future. Now, this is far enough for him to make seemingly erratic decisions, but decisions that allow him to move forward and advance into political power. So you can see far enough to see how to advance his career, but not far enough ahead to allow him to protect himself from his ultimate downfall. Dick directly connects Jones to Adolf Hitler, saying that Adolf Hitler had enough precognitive abilities perhaps to see somewhat into the future to and get into political power, but then he didn't see the long-term consequences of his actions, and therefore this led him to disaster in the end. Now, it's important to note that King in The Dead Zone directly compares Greg Stillson to Adolf Hitler. In fact, that's the question John Smith asks people when he decides to assassinate Greg Stillson is, would you go back in time and kill Hitler if you could? Of course, I have no idea if King read The World Jones Made. I'm making no implication that there's any cross-fertilization of ideas, but I think the similarities are kind of interesting. Here we have two politicians, both of who exhibit erratic and strange behavior that don't get in the way of their political rise and are eventually brought down in an assassination attempt. In The World Jones Made, it's a successful one. In The Dead Zone, it's not a successful assassination attempt, but it does succeed in ruining the character's political career. Greg Stillson being a psychic or a precog of some sort may explain his rise to power, despite him having no political skills. But it does not explain why he does not see that holding a baby to protect himself from an assassination attempt would not ruin his political career. Perhaps he just knew enough to try to save his life, if not his career. So anyways, that's a theory I'm throwing out there with no evidence at all. But please respond and please give your ideas on this. Do you think Greg Stillson could possibly be a psychically capable character in? So thank you for watching, and I'll be back with other theories and ideas and musings on American literature. And you can subscribe to my channel, also get some of my book reviews and other thoughts